Hello, welcome to Thoughtful Leadership. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Jessica Rice. I am a vision evolution coach who works with thought leaders to elevate their brand and really create more meaningful connections in their leadership. And this is a new direction that I wanted to start taking live discussions. So bear with me. I think this is a fun new way that we can really talk about our thought leadership and how we can be really thoughtful in our leadership. If you would like to comment while I'm speaking, please allow for wave communications, and then that way I can see the comments that are coming through. So I really want to talk to you about embracing authenticity and the key to effective leadership, and how do we really elevate our leadership in such a way where we're really being mindful with how we show up and work with the leaders in our organization, with our teams, with our clients and stakeholders, and all of the different people that we have to interface with. And so I really want to say that authentic leadership is thoughtful leadership. And I talked about that a little bit on Monday in the live that I did then. And so if you want to circle back, you can take a look at that as well, really focusing more on teams and how we create effective teams. So thoughtful leadership, I feel like, is this very important thing to really start considering when we're thinking about how we are authentic within our leadership and what we're bringing to the table. And so really, how do we set the context for this personal leadership style that we are bringing forth authentically? And the first thing I would mention to you is, how do you want to show up every single day? And really ask yourself that every single time that you are entering a meeting, entering a conversation, involved in a situation or a conflict. Oftentimes, we are not fully aware or conscious of ourselves or how we're showing up. So really ask yourself, how do I want to show up in this situation? What type of person do I want to be? What type of person do I want to be even in this relationship? How do I want to respond? How do I want to be seen? How do I want to create an impact? Our impact extends beyond our own personal experience. And I think this is even more imperative for leaders to understand, because we are setting the tone, essentially. We're setting the tone for the organization, for our teams, for the stakeholders, and how we interact and relate to the different people that we're working with. So we have the ability to create the experience that others are having. And I think oftentimes we're thinking so internally about our own experience, our own feelings or frustrations or imposter syndrome, that we forget that we are also creating an experience for other people. How we show up is what they experience. And so asking ourselves, how do I want to show up, is evoking this idea that we are setting the tone for everyone else's response, their memory, their recollection, and how they look upon the situation that we are a part of and co-creating. The more that we are conscious about our behaviors, our actions, and the impact that it has with teams and outcomes, the greater ability that we have to kind of close the gap in areas where we might fall short. So we have to be willing to get a little bit messy, to take some chances, and really think about how we want to even embody learning, embody not having all the answers, and really trusting that we need to create continually new paradigms of thinking and approaching problem solving. So when I'm thinking about authentic leaders and talking with leaders throughout my day, a lot of times it comes up with, how do I create a greater impact? How do I manage up? How do I, co-facilitate this environment for my team? And it always comes back to our self-awareness, our integrity. How are we in alignment with what we feel is right and true? And behaving in accordance with that. How are we being self-accountable? Acting however we want, allowing our authentic personality to come out is not necessarily what I'm talking about in authentic leadership. It's integrity. It's having the accountability to be the person that we want to be, to set the tone, to create and cultivate the environment in which we are a part of. And so that incorporates emotional intelligence and regulation. How are we regulating our responses, our internal reactions and emotions to things that we're facing every single day? Because it's not all roses and peaches and cream, right? There's challenges that we face as leaders. There's conflict. There's turmoil sometimes. There's disagreements. There's deadlines. And so creating that motivation, both for our teams and for ourselves, it requires us to have the emotional intelligence and true regulation so that we have awareness of how we're feeling, how we're responding. And even, how do we step back and take it into account so that we aren't just reacting? Connection, how are we cultivating relationships? As a leader, that is 90% of what it is that we're bringing is relationships and cultivating connections amongst our team, amongst, parallel teams and different verticals, how our teams are able to then talk with other executives and leaders within the organization, within stakeholders, customers, the type of research that they're a part of. We are very much responsible for how we're creating this ecosystem within our team. And so it really starts with our ability to create connection and relationships. And so really then, how is it that we're showing up consistently? Are we acting in accordance with our core values? Are we continually checking in with ourselves and our alignment with the type of person, the type of leader that we want to be? And if we can really look at it like, we are humans, everyone that we're working with are humans. How do we create a human experience, a human environment where we are recognizing, yes, together we are pushing towards goals together. So the more that we can create stability with how we show up in our leadership, consistency and connection, and being reliable is going to further our relationships and further our ability to create an impact and influence within our organization, much beyond how we just show up all the time. So I just want to present these ideas because it really is this idea of how we look inward that we then exhibit outwards. If we're overly reactive, if we're taking on stress and worry and anxiety and we are owning it in such a way where it's now impacting and affecting other people, it's a good time to then think about what are some of the things I need to do to rethink how I'm responding and reframe how I want to be in this role as an effective and authentic leader. So really, it requires a lot of self-development, self-awareness, and really coming back to those core values. What are our core values? And for each of us, that might look a little bit different. Because I think when we say core values, we assume that all of us have the same core values. It's not only about how we establish trust or don't lie or create honesty. It's also about some of those more, I want to say, those finer details, those finer pieces of values. For me growing up, humility was a huge value of mine. And so being able to then rise up in my own leadership sometimes created a conflict with this value of humility. I was in a call about an hour ago with Ann Betts, who is a renowned coach and neuroscientist. And we were talking about conflicting values because one value is not necessarily greater than the other if it's true for within us, but how do we handle a paradox of values? So that if we're asked to go and be really clear or direct, or have to do something that feels difficult for us, then how do we do it in such a way that's in alignment still with our other values? And how can we integrate these more? So if something isn't necessarily within our values, it doesn't always mean that it's wrong. It means that we have to think about how we challenge ourselves to do something that might be outside of our comfort zone and bring it into what feels true and right for us. And sometimes that isn't easy, because sometimes it is challenging that we have to make decisions that are difficult. So how do you think about that in terms of your context of, how you're showing up, what your perspective of reality is, and the values that you're bringing to the table? And then asking yourself too, how do my values differ from the values of my team? How do my values potentially differ from the values of the organization? What do we hold most important? This is what I'm referring to in terms of values. Sometimes our brain wants to go to the complete opposite end of the spectrum. If we bring it back, do we have differing values? My husband and I got married. We had different values. I was very much about humility, and he was really about promoting accomplishments. Neither one is wrong. But how do we bring and merge these ideas together where it feels natural to honor our accomplishments and still feel humble? How do we merge these ideas? And the more that we can think in these terms, the more that we are creating an integration, not only of ourselves, but with the people that we're working with within the organization itself, and really coming to terms and alignment with how we show up and how we operate within the context of our leadership, within the context of our team, within the context and the system of the organization. So if there's systems that we're working in that are competing with that, and if it's on another level, now we have greater awareness into, number one, our boundaries. And is it possible for us to integrate? Is it possible for us to show up in the way that we want to show up in the system that we are a part of? This requires us, number one, reframing the way that we approach our work, the reframing of how we think about how we show up, how we lead, how we make an impact, as well as challenging our own beliefs, challenging our own assumptions, and understanding, can opposites be in alignment? Can we be courageous and quiet? Can I be direct and kind? What are these things that come up for us that sometimes are subtle and not spoken about, but they create inner conflicts or even impressions of another individual, where we start to think about that differently and reframe our ideas around that? So this really requires that integrity and that transparency, and being honest with ourselves, being honest with sometimes when things don't feel quite right, and addressing that. Where do we need to address those areas within ourselves and potentially with another individual? Also being honest with the fact that you may not have all the answers. You may not have the right solutions. And so how do you lean into working with other individuals so that you can come into agreement and partnership with one another, and really pushing yourself outside of that comfort zone? Sometimes we want to stay within the comfort zone. It feels safe. It doesn't push us beyond. It doesn't make us potentially putting ourselves at risk, But we have to, if we want to be effective, we have to be able to be willing to push ourselves beyond that and get a little bit messy. And it's okay, because that is where we're learning. That is how we are demonstrating our willingness to show up and be present for other individuals. Doing this is modeling and demonstrating behavior for the organization, for our teams, that we don't have to be perfect, that we don't have to have all of the answers, that we don't have to have a guard up, this invisible barrier all the time because we're worried about how we're going to be perceived, what someone else will look at us like. And instead, lean into ambiguity, lean into uncertainty with curiosity so that we can open up our minds and get to know other individuals and their approach to working and what that means for our approach to working and how we solve problems so that we can be innovative with the way that we are leading. This is creating greater neural networks and connections within our mind as well. So you're increasing that neuroplasticity, your ability to reframe, relearn, rethink problems that you're facing, solutions that you're looking to create, how you're working with other individuals. And it's all these new approaches to showing up as a leader. This has a huge impact on your ability to cultivate relationships, to develop rapport, to create influence and greater impact, and really rise up in your thought leadership because you're willing to try something new. When we're curious, we are not making assumptions as easily, right? If we're leaning into curiosity, our brain's automatic response, our default neural network, is about making assumptions. It's about understanding and predicting an outcome. And it's based on things that we've already experienced, things that we've, have informed certain pathways that our brain goes down in the past. But that's not always true. And so that's where, assumptions and fallacies start coming into play. And we need to challenge our thinking. We need to challenge whether or not what we're assuming is actually correct. And so when we can think about it in a new way, we are developing that neuroplasticity, which is then in effect also helping our ability to self-regulate and helping our ability to be stable and to show up in the ways that we want to and ask that question, how do I want to be perceived as a leader? And are my intentions of that my actual outcome? Is that truly the action that I am taking? Sometimes we respond without thinking, and we assume that others are receiving us in the way that we intend. But we're not checking in with them, and we're not checking back in with ourselves on a continual basis to make sure that our assumption is correct. This is incredibly important because when we're talking about DEI efforts, different thought patterns, how we communicate, different communication styles, different backgrounds that we all bring into our work environment, the ecosystem in which we are operating. It requires us to think about how we're showing up, what we're thinking differently, so that we can then be open to new ideas and new paradigms of thinking and operating and being and how we view the world. That's how we create real change as a leader. It's not by what we know, by looking at what we don't know. What don't I know in this scenario? What questions do I still have? What do I need to still learn? What piece of information is missing for me? And slowing down so that we can speed up in the future. So really, really, really thinking about how you want to be as a leader. What does authenticity truly mean for you? And when you're thinking about being a thoughtful leader, what does that mean? What does that look like? How are you showing up and embodying the type of leader that you would like to be moving forward and creating that legacy for yourself so that when you're looking back, you know that you showed up in the way that you had hoped. I'd love to know what your thoughts are around this. How is this resonating for you? Do you think about thoughtful leadership in the same context as thought leadership? And what does authenticity truly mean for you? Please reach out, let me know in the comments, or send me a DM. I love to chat and get to know you. Always loving the comments and the connections that I'm making as well. So in any case, this is just the beginning. I just wanted to share a little touch of what authenticity means for us as a leader and how that can open up our mind into thinking differently and approaching our leadership maybe from a fresh perspective. Thanks for joining me today. Stay tuned for next Monday. I'll be going live again, and then we'll be again on next Wednesday as well. So thanks for joining me today, and we will talk soon.